And then we see, and if you want to turn back to chapter 7 of Daniel, then we see the next element. We've seen the angels, and then we've seen this incredible floor. But look at Daniel 7 at the throne itself. And then we see central to heaven in Daniel 7, verses 9 and 10, the very throne of God. This throne is completely encircled by that emerald green rainbow that's over, around, and beneath the throne. We're overwhelmed by the massive rumble of power, the endless peals of thunder and flashes of lightning that seem to radiate outward from within it. That's what chapter 4 told us about, that there's this lightning coming out this way from the throne, and there's this constant rumble of thunder, and you've got these 4 creatures that we're going to be introduced to soon with these faces around, and all this reflective floor. But as we look at Daniel 7, John says that there's loud voices, and it's like a roaring waterfall past those 7 blazing pillars of fire. But Daniel, that prophet of the Old Testament, also saw the same scene, and also brings a whole different perspective that John doesn't even tell us about, because probably he was just so overwhelmed at what he saw, he only recorded a little bit of it. But in verse 9 of Daniel 7, Daniel, seeing the same scene, said this, "I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow." Revelation 1 records that. "The hair of his head was like pure wool." Again, this pure white. Revelation 1 has that. This is where Daniel starts adding more detail. "His throne was a fiery flame." So the whole throne is burning like fire. I mean, right away, whoa. We don't even think in terms of that. We think of gold or wood, but it's on fire. It's fiery flame. Its wheels a burning fire, so the fire is moving in a circular way. And look at this. "A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him." That's the Ancient of Days on the throne. So at the stairway coming out in front of him, there's a river of fire flowing. I remember on Easter Sunday in 1990, preaching the Easter Sunday morning message. I was pastoring in Rhode Island at that time. And I remember just saying, if anybody here, like we heard in the testimony from the baptistry tonight, I said, if any of you would like to come to the risen Christ, you come this very moment. The place was packed. It was a New England church, and people were standing in the back. It was just a big service. And I said, if you want to come to Christ, come now. Let nothing delay. And there were so many people there that I didn't notice how many had come, and people were going like this and pointing, and so I assigned people to go over and pray. And the person that came forward that morning, it was a couple. Their family owned the Boston Red Sox. They were one of those kind, the old blue bloods, and they had been standing at the back and attending services and were gripped by reality of Christ and were saved that morning. I didn't even know they were over there on that side. I was working on this side, and it just happened that part of their businesses, they owned foundries, big, steel-making places. And after I discipled this fellow for a while, he says, "You ought to come see some of our factories." I said, "I'd love to see some of your factories." And we went up to see some of his factories. And he said, "I've been reading the Bible, and I found this Daniel chapter 7 stuff." And he said, "Could I show you a little bit of what that's going to look like?" I said, "Oh, sure." And he took me into the big place where they melt the iron and for casting. And he says, "Watch this." And he said, "I'm going to really spend a lot of money now." And he cranked up the electric. They melt all that in the blast furnaces, but they also keep it hot with these electric furnaces. And he had the controller crank that thing up, and I looked through with my goggles on through this thick glass, and you could just see the steel boiling. It was like boiling syrup or boiling water. He turned it up to it was just boiling, and it was so bright, and it just looked like diamonds and gold. You just can't until you see it. It's just like looking at lava. And he says, "Now watch this." And he had them dump the bucket, and I don't know what they had something ready for it, but they just dumped that thing, and a river of fire went down that, whatever it was going down. And I will never forget that day with that new believer as he said, I see Daniel 7. Look back at verses 9 and 10. It says, the Ancient of Days was seated there, and he doesn't have any blast furnace, and he doesn't need the Boston baseball teams or anything. He's just sitting there, and his throne is on fire, and this fiery stream is issuing out and coming out before him. And for just a moment, as that boiling steel went down that trough, I thought we just for an instant have a little taste of the majesty of God on high. But look what else is happening in verse 10. 1,000 thousands ministered to him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. You see, John and Daniel are looking at the very same thing. It's the hundreds of millions are there. But John didn't mention to us that while the lightning's going out like this and the thunder is rumbling and all these creatures are crisscrossing and everybody's falling on their faces, there's this river of fire that flows before. Remember what the writer of Hebrews says? Our God is a what? Consuming fire. Maybe that's a little bit of this throne on fire and this river of fire.